Welcome back to Ignite and Inspire, a podcast that was started to provide information to ignite your passions and live more fulfilling lives. Thank you so much for tuning back in. Today, I have a very special guest, one of my closest friends, Eric. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm excited to have you. I feel like we met closer to me coming to New York, but I've clearly seen you around Howard. We both went to Howard, and you were just that guy, on campus. You were doing your thing, but you also had the most genuine and pure spirit, and it's always inspired me and just been a reminder that despite what's going on in the world, you can do awesome things, and still stay true to who you are and still treat people with kindness and treat yourself with kindness. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Would you mind giving a small introduction of yourself? Who are you? Who is Eric?
Yeah, thank you for the intro. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Eric Julian. I'm an engineer and architectural designer, and I currently do computational design at an architecture firm.
So basically a lot of cool things. And I would love to spend some time getting into that. But before we hop in, circling back to just my experience of you and with you and having conversations with you, it's interesting to understand your background and kind of the shifts that you've gone through, not only physically, but also mentally. I know that coming into Howard, you kind of went through a period where you didn't recognize, I guess, who you were until people were like, no, you're that guy. And you're like, oh, okay. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, college was a time of kind of growing and evolving and constantly reinventing myself.
Yeah.
And I think that the person that I was starting at Howard is very different from the person that finished and graduated from Howard. And it was through this process of connecting with different people, finding like-minded creatives to be around, that I got closer and closer to my authentic self. And I think that it was a process that when you're in it, you don't really know that that's happening. But then when you look back, you're like, wow, I've changed a lot. And I think I've changed for the better while I was at Howard. So I think from the outside looking in, a lot of people were like, oh, I know that guy, but this is how I know him, or this is how I knew him. So that was definitely an experience. But internally, yeah, I don't think that I recognize, people see me as that guy. I'm just kind of being myself and being as authentic as I can be. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely one of my greatest takeaways from Howard, getting to grow and be more confident in knowing what I'm bringing to the table, whether that's creatively or professionally or just who I am mentally, physically, emotionally. And I think that's the beautiful thing about college and friendships that you gain through college. So, what
attracted you to architecture? How do you only the smartest of the smart make it through, but you truly have a heart and a passion.
Yeah.
In that, what is that? Where did it come from?
It's so I'm from Chicago originally, and I think it's a great city. It's a beautiful city. There are a lot of great examples of how architecture has impacted people, whether that's positively or negatively. And growing up, I always knew that I wanted to kind of be in that industry that was creating space. But I think my passion kind of comes from that experience of seeing how communities were segregated and divided through architecture and the built environment. So when I was in high school, I decided I would start in engineering, but I knew that long term I wanted to end up in architecture. So my first degree was in engineering, and then, to be fully transparent, I was going to work as an engineer for some time and then go back to school. But the pandemic happened, and I was I had that awakening moment that we all had of life is short. time is not promised. So I was like, what am I waiting for? So I applied to grad school and got into really great programs. So I went for it. And that pivot was like, honestly, life-changing. But in general, yeah, like that's what drives my passion for architecture. And being able to utilize the engineering skill sets that I got in the architecture field has also been very fulfilling. So that also keeps me going.
Got you. And for those of us that aren't from Chicago or aren't familiar with the landscape, what exactly, can you paint that picture of like what you saw, especially growing up, that left such a strong, lasting impact on you, so much so that it's driving your life, your career?
Yeah, it's so like you look up Chicago, you Google it, and you'll find pictures of the skyline, like very beautiful city. But there's also a lot of research into how the federal highways like clear cut full communities and just wipe them out and displace them, and how the systemic inequalities that exist in the city now are direct results of those types of projects. You have housing projects that were completely knocked down practically overnight, and that is very disruptive to community building. So a lot of that kind of happened before my time, but a lot of the inequities that I grew up witnessing, I later found out were the result of problematic development projects like those. So there's an Instagram account called I think Hood Mid-Century Modern, I think. And they do a lot of research into how a lot of cities across the country have been similarly affected. So definitely a interesting landscape to grow up in.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like it's something that I thought was completely normal. And when I got to DC, got to New York, started to travel more and see other cities and realized that that's not the norm for everybody growing up, that's what kind of opened my eyes to the positive work that you can do in this field. So that's kind of the landscape.
That's so awesome. I feel like, you know, going to Howard, we have friends from all over. So even hearing their respective understanding and experience growing up in their cities. Like I have friends from Louisiana, and they to this day feel and see the impact of how like the French Quarter, for example, was created to separate Black and brown communities from those of white. Even in Atlanta, like a lot of people don't know, but that 285 belt and all of the interstates that intersect were rail stations, and that's why the interstates are created in the way that they are. And depending on your community with or within that belt, like you have access to certain resources, or you're impacted by certain, you know, gerrymandering zones and all these kinds of things. So it's definitely a layered conversation that I don't think we have enough unless you're in like political or social advocacy work or things of that nature. How did you decide to go to Howard to study that in particular, or study engineering with architecture background to kind of influence or shape your learning?
Yeah. I mean, my journey to Howard was like a lot of people. Like I had a lot of family who went to Howard, and I'm a legacy student. So my mom graduated from Howard, and growing up throughout middle school, high school, she would take me to DC for homecoming. So I just fell in love with Howard, and it really felt like home when I was deciding between all of the great schools I got into. I knew that the one thing that didn't have a price tag or like a concrete value to it was how at home I felt when I was on Howard's campus. So I knew that I wanted to be in safe spaces while I was learning. And I also knew that I wanted to have an HBCU experience at some point in my academic career. And I almost ended up at Columbia for undergrad.
Wow.
And I basically decided, okay, Columbia's not going anywhere, but Howard undergrad is an experience that you only get one shot at. And so I chose Howard, knowing that one day I would reapply to Columbia and hopefully get in a second time. But yeah, that was my journey to Howard, and I wouldn't change that for the world. Like, a lot of people call me crazy for making that decision.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of the other schools I got into have a particular like perception of the value that those degrees hold. But I felt like if you know, like Howard is you want to be there.
Yeah.
Whenever you go, you get it. And a lot of the people who were telling me that had never been. They just heard Columbia more than they heard Howard. So,
got you. That's fair. And unfortunately, definitely a strong narrative and I guess association that's tied towards like HBCUs and the value of their education and impact. So you chose to go to Howard. You made this decision, packed up your things, really went to your second home. What was that experience like stepping on campus?
Yeah.
Meeting new people?
It was a whirlwind, honestly. Like, I thought I knew what I was getting into because I had been to the campus before, but I think like that first week, like freshman week, like you're like, oh, like I'm in a completely, like, no pun intended, I'm in a different world for real. Like, it was a beautiful experience just being able to be surrounded by people who look like me and talk like me but have completely different backgrounds. Like, you meet, and I think there's a misconception that like HBCUs are very like monolithic, but a lot of the people you meet at HBCUs can tell you stories that you've never heard ever. You have people from the islands, you have people from the continent of Africa, like you have all different types of Black people, and not only just Black people, you really have everybody.
Yeah.
So my perspective being opened up from I'm just a kid from Chicago to now I'm surrounded by people from every corner of the world was a very eye-opening experience. And then being able to go to class and learn things that I'm passionate about, but also have the lens and the angle of these are the Black leaders in this field. This is how this industry intersects with Black history. It's a very like unique experience. And socially stepping onto campus was great too, because again, like I'm learning things from everybody around me because they're coming from different cities, but also unlearning a lot of the things that I'm bringing from my upbringing in Chicago. So it was great. Like, definitely a whirlwind and a lot to adapt to, but 10 out of 10, honestly.
Okay, but like we're also completely glossing over the fact that like you showed up and there was like this whole phenomenon of like followship, like fangirling almost. Like, what was that?
That was something I wasn't expecting, honestly. And it's been funny to like joke with you and our other friends about that because there was this whole perspective that I hadn't heard until after I graduated from Howard.
I knew nothing about this too. I was like, what?
I didn't know about it.
It's like a
either.
secret world.
I mean, I think it's just college. Like, I think, so for context, actually, I don't know if we should put that on the internet. But so basically, in a nutshell, like, Howard is one of those schools that has like group chats and like you connect with a lot of people before you get to campus. So and just because of how many homecomings I had gone to before I was a student, I had met a lot of people in passing or on the internet. And so I think that people saw my profile picture, they saw the messages I was putting in the group chats, and they kind of built this like perception, this persona of who I was. And then I got to campus and people were like, oh, like, he's just chill. Like he's not this like inflated guy that everybody's painted him to be. But yeah, it's funny because people were coming up to me on campus like second week of school, like, oh, like I've heard of you, like I know who you are. And I'm like, why? Like, I'm not doing anything crazy. Like, how have you heard of me? But I didn't know that there was so much chatter about me and who people thought I was until I graduated and befriended like you and some of the other girls we're friends with in the city, and they're like, yeah, like they were talking about you in our group chats, like, and I'm like, I didn't know any of that was happening.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
I feel like, so I was in the School of Business, and we were kind of in our own little bubble. So to a certain extent, there's a whole subsect of Howard I didn't know about. So I was simultaneously, while Eric was getting this information, I'm like, what? Wait, run this back. But I think a lot of people can probably attest to having these perceptions developed and these personas developed, and then just in your head, you're a person that left your home, came to Howard, trying to figure life out. You're by yourself. You're trying to figure out this new city and probably a little insecure, maybe not. A lot of questions, whole lot of no answers, just vibes. And little do you know, there's like this whole perception of you that you just don't know. And then people meet you in real life and they're like, oh, you actually are nothing like what I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of social media or like org associations. I have no idea, but it's definitely interesting to say the least. Do you feel like there are some relationships that you had at Howard that you either no longer have now or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. I think that's part of growing up, though. Like, you kind of outgrow people. But I definitely think that experience specifically, but also in general, just when you start school and you're 18, by the time you finish, you're 21. Like, there's a lot that happens in between those years. Yeah. So yeah, like I got close to a lot of people who I don't talk to anymore today.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people can attest to that, right? I do think that having that additional layer of like, oh, like you're Eric, I've heard like you through this person or through this organization or whatever, and people like realizing like, oh, like that's not necessarily the box that you're in.
Yeah.
I definitely do think that's a layer that kind of plays into that, outgrowing people. But like I don't have any regrets about that. Like my outlook on life and on connecting with people is like you experience them for a day, a month, a season, whatever. And the people who are supposed to stick around will stick around. So definitely it's tough to outgrow people, but like at the end of the day, that added to the beautiful experience that I had on campus. And I learned a lot from those people too. So all in all, like it was a great time.
That's so real.
Yeah.
And it continues to be a good time. Once a bison, always a bison.
Always.
That's very beautiful in the grand scheme. So now you're living in New York. It seems like you always knew you're going to have some period, some season in New York. How has this been? How has that transition?
I would be lying if I said it was an easy transition.
Yeah.
Like, and I think a lot of people who move to New York or really any big city will have that kind of like, there's a little bit of friction, like just getting adapted. You're right. I did always like dream of living in this city, and now that I'm finally here, it's like still kind of unreal at times. Like I'll be sitting at my desk, like looking out the window, and I'm like, whoa, like I'm doing the things that I wanted to do when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But getting to this point was not easy at all. Chicago is a car city. DC is also kind of a car city. So like giving up my car and moving to New York and carrying my groceries on the train, like trying to find furniture in the city and get it back to my apartment.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of little things like that. But I also recognize that it's a privilege to have those experiences outside of New York and come here. So even though it's not the easiest thing to do, like I'm grateful that I can even compare this experience to something else. And yeah, like I thought I was prepared for it because I grew up around a big city, but New York is a different beast for real.
Different beast. Like even as recent as this morning, some car was honking. For what reason? I have no idea, but I so badly, like if my intrusive thoughts won, I would walk up and just say like, I just need to know, why did you honk? Like, what was the purpose? Are you angry? Are you like, what is actually happening here? It's not for the weak. The city is not for the weak.
It's not. But I feel like, honestly, being pulled out of your comfort zone is so important, especially in this period of time, like in our lives. So it's not for the weak. But if you want to be strong, you got to do it. You got to do something, right?
Amen, yeah.
But no, I think the aha moment for me was when I moved into my first apartment. Loved it, loved the location, but it was right next to a train line. And I saw that as like a pro. And it's an underground train. So I was like, yeah, like cool. Like I can get around the city quick. I woke up every 15 minutes for like the whole first 2 or 3 months.
Stop.
Because it was rumbling under my apartment overnight, right? So I just had to get used to like
adjust.
But there's a lot of little things like that. And I'm sure if you transplant it to any other big city, like you would find those little things that you have to adapt to. So it's nothing to complain about, but it's definitely, like you said, it makes you aware that this city's not for the weak.
That's fair, because I definitely had my thoughts on DC too. I'm like, y'all are strange. No. I love DC.
Shout out DC.
Shout out to DC. But that's so real. And I think oftentimes I'm guilty of not considering how blessed I am to have this experience, but to your point, even be able to compare it. Because even thinking about my hometown, so many people, at least probably 80% of the people that I went to school with probably have never traveled outside of Georgia, let alone Atlanta. So to be able to compare it to another city, to be able to say I've even had an opportunity to live here, it's a blessing. And I definitely need to keep that top of mind when people are honking at me for no reason, or the train is 20 minutes late for whatever reason. But no, that's so real. And so you went to Columbia. I know we've talked on the side of just about how different of a experience that was, especially having gone to an HBCU.
Yeah. It's, again, another adjustment I had to make at the same time. I moved here to start at Columbia. So was completely uprooting my life and kind of starting fresh. There are a lot of great things about Columbia. There are a lot of things that Columbia has to improve on. The finding community aspect of school was a lot different at Columbia for me, because I'm at a predominantly white institution now. I'm in architecture school, and I had never studied architecture formally. So there was a lot of like learning and unlearning I had to do. At the same time, I was transitioning into a new city. So I will say that the amount of connections that I built through Columbia have been like invaluable. A lot of great people, a lot of great academics, creatives are centered around Columbia. Also, just being in proximity to Harlem has been amazing. So that definitely those were like the pros for me. But cons, like outright, there's not as many Black people at Columbia as it was at Howard. So that was just something I had to adjust to. But the Black people I did meet at Columbia, 10 out of 10, amazing people. And even my non-Black friends from Columbia, also 10 out of 10. So like, it was just a different experience. But I'm glad that I had my HBCU experience to kind of like root me in, because I don't know, I kind of needed those 4 years at Howard. So yeah.
That's real. How did you approach intersecting those two worlds? Did you, or were you like, I want to keep them separate?
At times, like I definitely blended the social circles. I think like the geography of the city made it difficult at times. Like a lot of us were kind of rooted in Harlem, and a lot of my Howard friends are rooted in Brooklyn. but the idea of being able to like bring my new friends to a function with my old friends was great. And I think intersecting the professional, like creative side of being in school, and also just having like my friends from Howard who are doing cool things in the city, being able to like connect people to each other who otherwise probably never would have crossed paths was also really cool. So yeah, like there were so many positive takeaways from being the Howard kid at the PWI. Yeah. And there's also a like huge group of HBCU students at Columbia. So also got to connect with people from Morehouse, Spelman, A&T. Like there's a lot of great people at Columbia.
That's awesome. And you mentioned like there was a learning curve even transitioning from engineering to now an why is it tripping me up? Architecture, like heavily focused curriculum.
Yeah.
What was that and how did you work through those transitions?
Yeah,
I probably would have thrown a tantrum. I don't know.
I was very close often. Architecture school, like engineering school, is full of all-nighters. So I was kind of prepared for the workload, but it's a different type of exhaustion, having to be creative around the clock, as opposed to engineering school. You're looking for one solution to most of your problems, and it might take you all night, but you know the workflow and the strategy to figuring out the solution. Architecture school, you constantly have to throw things at the wall, come up with new ideas, and be strategic about that. So at 4 a.m, you're staring at a computer trying to design something. Very different fatigue than punching numbers into a calculator and checking off, okay, finally I know what the solution is.
Wow.
So there was that part. And then also the architecture industry, unfortunately, is built upon a lot of precedents from European white men that I've never heard of. So I would be in class and people are referencing buildings and designers who I didn't grow up being exposed to. So I kind of felt like I was learning a new language while I was like also doing that transition into grad school, also doing the transition into a new city. So I was kind of like a fish out of water. But the way I explain it to people now is like once you're over that that barrier, like that language barrier, being able to translate things is really powerful. So like now I can sit in a room full of engineers and translate the creative, artsy, European precedents to a bunch of engineers who really just need a number at the end of the day, or vice versa. Like I can talk about the structure of a building from an engineering perspective, but break it into simpler terms for people who might not have that background. So in the moment, I was like, what in the world? Like, I don't know what I got myself into. But now that I'm like in my career, I'm extremely grateful for having that period of transition because it forced me to learn a new language and get good at speaking it. So
wow.
Yeah.
Did you have moments where you were like, look, I can just go to tech or something like?
Yeah. I mean, because a lot of our friends in the city are in tech, they're in finance, like having an engineering degree, like there was always that plan B, plan C of like, I could just go back to the engineering field and make really good money. But I knew that the things that I wanted to do with my career and the things that I'm passionate about meant that I had to see it through and get this architecture degree. And just in the last 6 months, 12 months, the amount of experiences and opportunities and people that I've come across who are also passionate about the same things, like, has made it all worthwhile. So it's tough, but stick it out. Like, it's worth it in the end.
What do you want to do? Do you know?
It's something that changes like often for me.
Yeah.
So like right now I'm doing data analytics, computational design, and I love it.
What does that mean?
So it's a very broad term, right? It's basically a lot of the metrics that our clients need to make decisions about buying into architectural design, whether that's, for example, if you have a corporate client and they want you to design their offices, they need to know how many seats are going to be in that office and at what point will we outgrow that office? Because if we outgrow it in a year, it's not worth the investment. So the number side of architecture is something that I'm kind of focused in on right now. And the number skill set is the data skill sets. Those are things that I got from being in engineering school.
Yeah.
It's not really something that you're automatically exposed to in architecture school. So it's very like niche, right? But the term computational designer, data analytics can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I think that, like I've talked about, you know, my passion for design. That's something that eventually I do want to get back to in an architectural sense. I'm also excited about experiential design. Like that's something that I kind of study or like tune into outside of the current work that I'm doing. And also like that's also kind of like a broad term. I think specific to architecture, when I think about experiential design, it's taking concepts for maybe a fashion campaign or a marketing event and coming up with the architectural like concept behind that story that you're trying to tell. I think that's a really cool line of work to be in. And I haven't quite tapped into it yet, but it's something that creatively like inspires me a lot. So I try to study that on the side.
That's so awesome. Like it sort of connects to what I do professionally, because I do a lot of experiential marketing. And the design makes such a difference. It's so important. So there's definitely like a whole facet of, I guess, architecture. I didn't even truly consider that piece, but that's so awesome creatively. I also love, like, especially when you travel, I feel like even in what you capture, some of it is like, oh, I'm here in this random city. Okay, cool. But like, it's also like architecturally look at the beauty within this space. And a lot of people don't know, but a small, very small portion of me wanted to go to school for visual arts. So I have personal heart when you do capture that, because I'm like, wow, like he perfectly captured how visually a person's eye can be drawn to the roof randomly, or because of where certain focal points are, like where your eye kind of carries through a space. And that's a whole thing within it itself. So I think what you do is super cool, and I'm intrigued to see what happens, and the different pivots that you're able to make and that you will make and all the things. That's all, like, awesome.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the cool part about being in this city with y'all, like all of our friends from school, because I think a lot of us are doing very different things, but it's really cool seeing what the possible intersections are.
Yeah.
And just thinking like long term about where our careers are going to go and the amount of opportunities that we have to collaborate with each other.
Yeah.
Is super cool. And I like, again, that's another privilege that I'm super grateful to have. But yeah, it's also just knowing that like down the line, like a lot of my friends either just finished law school or are starting law school, and knowing that I'm gonna be able to say like, yeah, let me call my lawyers, like, and they're literally just my friends from undergrad, like a privilege that I'm really grateful to have. So it's also inspiring, like seeing the work that you do and seeing everything that our friends are working on.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring that up, because like, for example, my line sister Lolo, she's currently in med school, and so many times we call her and we're like, so I have this bump, like, what is it? What should I do? Or like, we'll be out somewhere and she's like, ladies, don't take your heels off. Your feet are going to swell because the blood is like, and we're like, I don't know what you just said, but I'm a trust you. Yeah. How many times do people call you like, hey, I have this problem in my house, or like, I'm building this thing?
Often.
What do you say?
It's honestly like, it's cool being that friend. Like my little sister actually she's moving to LA right now, and she was like comparing different apartments, and she was like sending me the floor plans. And she's like, okay, like, where would I put the TV? Like, should I mount the TV? Should I put it here? And I'm like at my desk, like, hey, like, I'm at work, but I'm trying to answer her questions. And she's like, it's like having my little built-in interior designer. Like, I love having a brother in architecture. So it's something that I love to like talk to people about, because I can kind of like geek out. But yeah, I think the one thing was like, a lot of my friends were like, I want you to design my house one day. And that was, I don't know, like, I don't know if I would ever ask somebody else to design my house. So I was like, okay, but like, it's actually really cool thinking about the future possibility 20, 30 years from now to say, yeah, like, I designed houses for a bunch of successful people, successful Black people. So it's cool. Like, I like that avenue, that door being open.
Yeah. That's so funny, but also, to your point, very cool, and a good little nugget, I guess, to keep in the back of your mind and help you on the low days, or you're like, what am I even doing? It's like, no, one day I'll be able to, not even one day, today I'm able to drive impact. And that impact and ability to drive is only going to get bigger and stronger. So that's dope. Yeah.
It's I've also been keeping up with my passion for mentorship since I moved to New York. And I think that's super important, because as we're kind of breaking into industries that are not representative of where we live, meaning it's not as diverse as it should be, I think we don't realize it, but for a lot of younger generations, we're really the representation that they need to see. And so, yeah, like, while I was in architecture school in the trenches, I'm like, what am I doing? But I would then on the weekends, like, do mentorship events and tell middle schoolers about architecture, and them being able to say, wow, like, I know what architecture is, and they're 9, 10 years old, is impactful, right? But me being in the trenches, I would never think that, like, yo, like, what I'm doing right now actually has an impact, a value for somebody. So things like those moments kind of kept me going when it got tough.
That's so real. And even back to like your earlier point, just a reminder to like thank God in the process.
100%.
And especially like thanking him that you can be a model for someone else. So understanding that, you know, you are the minority in this space, in this field, what misconceptions are there? What would you hope more people do, especially like Black and brown people? Like, what are the misconceptions about the space, the architecture space? And I guess like I'm asking for you to make the pitch for architecture. Like, what's tea?
I think that, you know, the industry, the architecture industry, like a lot of other industries right now, being not as diverse as they should be. It's something that we're all aware of, right? But how do you actually solve that problem? It's talking to younger generations and exposing them to it, so that they know that that's a potential career path. A lot of, like, I didn't know what architecture was really until I was in high school. And so knowing that a lot of other people who don't necessarily look like me have been exposed to that for their whole life because their uncles, their fathers and mothers are already architects, it's definitely like you kind of have to play catch up a little bit, right? Yeah. So me knowing that is why I'm still like, okay, I need to set time aside to make sure that I'm volunteering here and exposing younger generations to that. I think that I don't know if it's necessarily a misconception in the truest sense of the word, but I think one thing that people don't think about is a design architecturally, if it's not representative of the people who are going to be interacting with it and using it, it's not sustainable. So I think like a lot of people are like, oh, we need to make sustainable cities. Like we need our buildings to last longer. But if the buildings don't serve the communities that they're within, they're not sustainable. So my whole pitch is that if we want to build a world that is actually going to serve us long term, we have to be more strategic and thoughtful about getting people into this industry, because it doesn't make sense for designers to be coming in to cities and spaces and communities that they've never been in, never talked to a person in that community, but saying, I know what's best. I'm going to put this library in the middle of a park that people are actively using. You know what I mean? Like, it's instances like those, like growing up in those communities, you inherently know what's best for your community. So it serves everybody to have designers from those communities in the industry. So that's my pitch.
No, and I think I'm learning a lot too myself, because to your point, up until probably high school, college, when I thought of architecture, I thought of like construction, and I didn't think of the design aspects of architecture. I didn't think of the corporate side of architecture. And even to this last point, like the research aspect. And as I continue to learn and grow and mature, I recognize how large the gap is between like our politicians and the advocacy work that is done around our landscapes than like the people who are actually constructing and building these spaces, and how important and integral those of you who are in this industry are to being an advocate and a support, but also informing decisions. And so it's definitely like broadening my mind as well. So I'm grateful to you for doing the work of spreading the good word, but also like mentoring others and inspiring others to say like, hey, maybe you're interested in art, maybe you are interested in engineering, tech, whatever, but like, have you considered this world or the intersection of all of those things? So that's really beautiful. On the topic of research, I know in addition to your 9 to 5, you do a lot of research on the side. Can you talk to me about some of those projects or some of the work that you do? And also, how do you find the time?
Yeah, it's tough. That time balance is definitely tough. Yeah. The research that I do really stems from a lot of academic pursuits while I was in grad school, and a lot of the conversations I was having with like-minded classmates and professors who are interested in how architecture can be used to like build community. For example, I've done research in Culebra, Puerto Rico, about how they are trying to increase their solar energy infrastructure. And it's not a matter of just sending solar panels there. They need education around how to maintain the solar panels. It's a very small island. And so the research there was like multifaceted. I was working with urban planners, and we actually delivered like a whole proposal to them. Like, this is what would need to take place for this to be feasible. And there are other like ongoing things from the policy government side to supplement that. But that's one example. The current project that I'm working on is called Safe Haven U. And it's this deep dive into HBCU culture and architecture. I'm really trying to pinpoint the things architecturally that make HBCU so special. For example, the one example I always go to is our freshman year dorms. It's, if you know, you know. But being in a HBCU freshman dorm is a once in a lifetime experience, and a lot of the friendships and connections that you make really will last you a lifetime. It's something that you might experience at a PWI, but it's not necessarily what you think of when you think of like college culture, right? The libraries that we studied in are the backdrops for Black history moments that we continue to talk about decades later, right? Having that environment is like, I don't even think you could describe it in words. Like, when I look back on those 4 years, it's something that I truly wish and pray everybody could experience. So the project in a nutshell is just trying to capture that energy and put it into architectural terms to advocate for colleges of the future to be better safe havens for counterculture, counter-protest, self-expression, education in general, because that's something that I felt like Howard afforded me, but I don't think that it's universal to everybody's college experience. The second long-term part of the project is painting the picture of how underfunded HBCUs currently are. There are 106 HBCUs right now.
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly, give or take. And I think Howard's about to be, if it didn't already happen, the first HBCU to hit $1 billion endowment, whereas a lot of the top predominantly white institutions have multi-billion-dollar endowments already, and they've had that for a very long time. So when you talk about access to resources and access to education at a systemic level, how do we better equip and employ Black students? It really does have to start with $1, right? Like, we have to put that into a number. And so that's kind of where I'm starting to bring in data analytics to paint this picture of this is what needs to happen if we want our HBCUs to thrive and if we want HBCU students to thrive long term. I will say that, and this is also another privilege and like something that I'm grateful for, I think we're in a moment where HBCUs are starting to get their shine. And it's not that that wasn't there, but I think that more people are now aware of what HBCUs bring to the table, which is a great thing. And with that, I think we're seeing a lot more donations into schools' endowments. We're seeing a lot more scholarships and job opportunities directed specifically at HBCUs. And so the pitch is all 106 HBCUs should have access to that. And that's why I'm painting the picture that I am with my research.
I love that. I love that too, that I feel like Howard gets a lot of flack because they're like, there are more HBCUs than just the Howards, the Spelmans, the Morehouses, the FAMUs and CATs. Like, you're truly looking at the broad spectrum of HBCUs and the spaces that they curate and have curated for years. And then having the awesome privilege of being a quad queen. Like, I get it. You know what I mean? Having literally been in a dorm that enclosed us in a space and forced us to develop sisterhood in a way that I probably wouldn't have gotten at a PWI. That's a core memory that no one can take away from me, and I learned so much fundamentally from that experience. Yeah. I'm still very close to my freshman year roommates. We call each other the Roomigos.
Okay.
Shout out to the Roomigos. But no, I love it, and I'm invigorated by even just you speaking about it. How can people like support your work or support you in your work, support the project?
Yeah, you can follow it at _SafeHavenU on Instagram or online, safehavenu.com. It will have more things coming out over the fall months. So around the time y'all will be seeing this, probably there will be a lot of things published, hopefully. A lot of things in the works.
We're speaking it into existence.
Really for sure.
No,
But
that's so exciting.
It's an ongoing project. It's something that's going to be happening long term. And hopefully, I really do want to kind of create a platform for more collaboration with my research. So it's something that y'all can support. Y'all can, at some point, add to. So follow us and stay involved.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you feel like is critical for our lovely I&I friends to know, or and or what do you hope people take away from this conversation?
That's a really good question.
We talked about it a lot, so I know.
We did.
If there's a couple of things, feel free to.
No, I think first takeaway is never be afraid to reinvent yourself. There's this Solange quote, and I'm gonna misquote it, but she says something about being able to take advantage of that opportunity to reinvent yourself being like, it's something that we kind of take for granted, right? But the moment you feel like something doesn't work for you anymore or you want bigger and better, you're liable, you have the opportunity to do that. So never be afraid to take that advantage. For me, that was pivoting from engineering to architecture at a young age, or choosing that I wanted to go to Howard instead of Columbia. But those were some of the pivotal moments that really have shaped who I am right now. I think the second thing, like, I would say, like you said, thank God and just be grateful and cherish all of the opportunities and experiences that you have. Cherish the people that you have. Again, something that I take for granted at times, but I constantly try to remind myself of how blessed I am to be in friendship and in community with you and everybody else that surrounds us, and also to be in an environment where I can connect with y'all and explore our creative passions, our professional passions, and build with y'all. So any access that you have to that, like, cherish that 100%.
That's so real. That's so real. And how can people connect with you, follow you, support your journey?
Yeah, y'all can follow me on Instagram at _Eric Julian, EricJulian. I guess we could have just spelled it and like put it on the screen, right?
I mean, all of the above. Spelling it
above.
out. You sound like a expert podcaster. So
yeah,
I appreciate it.
Follow me on Instagram, and yeah, like, keep in touch. Like, I love connecting with new people, and I also post about a lot of the work that I do with my research and also in the architecture field as well. So you can stay up to date there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate you being a part of this new season of Ignite and Inspire and this new journey. And I look forward to seeing you continue to flourish and grow and impact the world and the spaces and people around you. It's super awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for building this platform. Like, if y'all don't know, like, I listen to every single episode, and it definitely is a part of my morning routine. Like, anytime a new episode drops, I'm listening to it. So thank you for building this platform and having me on it.
Thank you for listening. When you're like, oh my God, it's your co-host, I'm like, you listen for real?
Yeah, shout out to Ace.
Thank you so much. Well, friends, family, that concludes this episode of Ignite and Inspire. Thank you so much for listening. As always, like, comment, subscribe, follow, all the things. You can find us on any and all platforms, as well as, or especially on Instagram at Ignite and Inspire Podcast. And we look forward to getting inspired with you on the next episode.